Hello, everyone. Welcome to Fired Up, the podcast for marketers working in early and late stage startups. Well, hello there, everyone. Welcome to Fired Up. My name is Morgan McLintic, and today we're going to be talking about how to measure brand awareness. So an important topic, and to do that, I am joined by Alastair Nee, who is our SVP of Growth Marketing. So Alastair, welcome to Fired Up.
Hey, happy to be here.
Looking forward to this conversation today. So brand awareness, it's the year of brand. It's very important, but it's difficult to measure. You can go out and do a survey of all of your target audiences and ask them, have you heard of this brand? Whether it's prompted or unprompted, but that obviously takes time and it costs money. So for most emerging tech brands, they don't do that. And in fact, they don't measure brand awareness at all because it is difficult. So what we thought we'd do today is we've worked out a way to measure it, and we just thought we'd go through our approach and the pros and cons of that. And so, Alastair, just to kick us off here, why has brand awareness been historically so difficult to measure when it comes to B2B?
Right. Well, I think, first of all, everyone in marketing especially can agree that brand awareness matters, right? It's very foundational to all the work we do. So every ad, every campaign, every organic campaign, piece of content, in-person event, every impression that you get equals awareness. There's also positive and negative. So you would hope that the awareness that you're generating is positive and you're putting your best foot forward and sticking with your brand voice and approaching it that way. But it's always been this enigma when it comes to actually measuring it, right? So despite the importance and that we all agree, we should be building the brand and awareness of our brands. It's really hard to quantify, right? And you really lack clear metrics that makes it much harder to prove ROI for any brand awareness generating campaigns that you roll out, right? So unlike lead gen, especially in advertising, where you put X amount of dollars into your campaign and you can expect some amount of clicks and you could track those very easily, which later convert. You can look at conversion rate. You look at the cost per that conversion. You can follow that all the way through to opportunities and close one, eventually ROI. It's very attributable, whereas awareness really isn't like that because the growth of such really lives inside the mind of consumers and prospects, right? So the mission is really effectively to build trust so that your brand becomes top of mind when a prospect enters into their research phase, right?
Yeah, exactly. And unlike other areas of marketing, which I feel are so metricated, almost over indexing on the numbers, brand awareness is just is one area where people hardly measure it at all, right? And yet you're supposed to be, we know it's important. You're supposed to be investing in it. And we just got no numbers here. So is what we're doing moving the needle? And it's just very difficult to justify investment in that. So what do you feel like there's been the impact of not having those clear metrics when it comes to brand awareness?
Yeah, great question. So despite there being a quorum that brand awareness is vitally important in marketing, right, and business, there's always been this challenge of getting stakeholders to buy into this because of the fact that it's a little bit harder to quantify. And without that measurement, it's really hard to secure budget. I think most executives, rightfully so at times, gravitate towards tactics that are much easier to attribute, much easier to measure with those immediate outcomes. And we've been learning and reading that there's a best practice guidance where really 60% of your marketing should be really focused on growing brand awareness. So getting that trust and authority within your target market, right? And only 40% really should be performance or sort of lead generation. And this is coming straight from a report, Media in Focus by Les Binet and Peter Field, I believe. So in reality, right, most companies and startups, especially, they tend to really overspend on lead gen because there's an urgency to get the pipeline going and to show that value and that return on your advertising budget, and you get the most trackable ROI as possible, right? But this kind of creates a short-term bias where you're mining a limited pool of in-market buyers instead of expanding the funnel. And even on top of that, people are not really going to be converting at a high clip when they don't know who the hell you are, no matter how great your offer is in the lead gen side of things, right? So you really have to build up your brand profile with the right people, with a concerted brand awareness approach and campaigns that grow that awareness, right? And then once you have more signal, more intent from these audiences, that's when you start to ask them to take more action, whether it be download this asset, join our sign up for our webinar, right? Or make a purchase, where we tend to get ahead of ourselves in that regard.
So I think that's exactly right. If you think about the other metric that 95% of your buyers, prospective buyers, are not in market at any one time, only 5% of them are, and you're just focused on closing that 5% who have not really heard of your brand, you're really fishing in a very small pool there, and so of high intent people who are a particular type of buyer. So actually, the better investment is to start building your brand awareness amongst that other 95%. So when they do come in to the market, they've heard of you. And, you can't sell to people unless they're sort of going to be receptive to it. And the other stat that we often quote here is that buyers end up choosing one of the 3 brands that they had heard of at the beginning of their buy cycle. And unless you're on that list, you're not going to be included. So here, if you think about, that's why you get the 60-40 split on brand versus lead gen, because you've got to warm up your audiences before you try and convert them. But I think it's natural to think for startups, particularly, like, okay, we've got a finite amount of budget. We've got to fill the pipeline. Let's just focus most of our efforts on that. And it takes some nerve to kind of go, okay, I'm going to take a longer term view and build my brand. Why do you think it's sort of even more important today than it has been ever before?
So this is a big one, right? Obviously, there are some massive upheavals in the marketing world right now. The first one, I think, is going to be the rise of zero-click behavior. So not only in organic search, where these AI-enriched experiences, Google's AI overviews, for example, and a crossover in AI search on all of your popular platforms, ChatGPT, Perplexity, they are delivering such rich information-filled results that much of the time users don't need to click through to your website to learn more. They are doing their evaluation, their comparisons, their education, all within these platforms without ever leaving and coming to your site, right? So brand awareness becomes that much more important because you want to get your information, your brand upfront in those results, right? Additionally, I think there's probably a little something to this dead internet theory. Not that all of the traffic is completely just bots, but much of it is. And not just bots with a nefarious sort of purpose, but also bots from crawlers, LLMs doing the searching. So it's really, you're optimizing and creating brand awareness for not only people now, but also for these systems, right? So you have to inform people about what your brand is all about and what your differentiators are. But you also have to have information that crawlers and LLMs can easily associate and understand what you're about. And probably the third thing I would throw in there, right, is generational shifts. I think millennials obviously have been in the workforce for a while now, and now Gen Z coming in, joining buying committees, they really value authenticity. So I think keeping your brand message and your awareness campaigns human centric and sort of human created is going to be increasingly important. That's really 3 strong reasons why brand awareness is now more important than ever, and it's front and center. Brands have to be thinking about getting closer to that 60% split in their marketing budget for that and 40 for lead gen. So, with those sort of three major shifts in marketing happening all at once, it's intense. There's a lot to learn and keep up with. But again, front and center, if you're doing some fun, creative things with your brand and generating positive awareness in a really memorable way, I think that's the opportunity. And so that's why we wanted to work on building a way to actually help measure, quantify, visualize brand awareness, because like I said, we all agree awareness is important, but it's just been this thing that we rarely actually dig into and try to prove that, hey, if I do this type of campaign and this spend over here, I'm obviously growing my brand over this amount of time.
Right. I totally agree with that. And so let's dive into, okay, we know brand awareness is hard to measure, but it's not impossible to measure. So as I'm thinking about this, I want to build some kind of dashboard. I guess brand awareness does not change quickly. So we want some kind of system to track it over time. Where do we start?
Right. So what we've effectively done is create this system that gives value and shows the impact kind of across all of the marketing channels through proxy metrics, because true brand awareness being this intangible thing, you can't directly see it in the dashboard. So instead, you track these proxies as signals that then correlate with more people clearly knowing, recalling, and recognizing your brand to give your team, your bosses, something tangible to show for your work that you're doing in brand awareness, right? It's also a framework that's designed to be accessible. It's not necessarily for Fortune 100 companies, although it could, because they have many other tools and teams and data scientists to help with this. It's very accessible. It's intentionally simple, yet also thorough enough where most startups, really all startups, can access the systems to get the data to build this measurement framework. So it's stuff that's pretty standard out of the box and oftentimes is free. And it really focuses on reach and impressions, right? As soon as you go any further than that, you're not really talking about awareness anymore necessarily. If you talk post-click, visit to the website, there's so many other factors at play. We talk about UI, UX, your messaging, that kind of thing. There's a lot more to measure there. So we want to keep this focused on, are we showing up in the places where our audience is and making an impression there? I don't care if they click or not. I just want to know if I'm where they're at, which matches up nicely to this idea of zero click, because if they're not going to be clicking as much anyways, you have to show up there.
Right. So our audiences are going about their business, doing the things that they do, not showing signs of intent by clicking on our website. We want to track what their perception is about our brand, or what their awareness might be about our brand out there rather than on our own property. So those are the metrics we're trying to find here.
Exactly right.
Okay. So let's just talk about what those proxy metrics are. Now, we've got a little list of them here, and look, there are pros and cons to each of these, but let's just unpack them one by one, because these, as you said, are simple to measure. They should be ideally free to do, and they should sort of correlate with how well known is our brand. And the first one here is, well, it's direct sessions. So let's talk about that.
Absolutely. Now, keep in mind, there are 8 different metrics we track that together create the most comprehensive view of your brand and kind of covers almost all of the channels that modern marketing touches on. And I wouldn't necessarily say that it's required that companies do all 8 of these, because one of them, for example, it has to do with paid search. So you may not be running paid search, but if you're doing at least 5 of these or 6, that should be enough. But all 8 is typically better and more actionable. So as you said, the first one is a classic that almost every marketer would agree is important to kind of correlate with brand awareness growth, is direct sessions, right? Because these are unique visits to your website. People arrive by typing your URL, using a bookmark for your URL, your domain, right? Or coming from untracked sources in Google Analytics 4. But the logic is, if these are steadily increasing, it shows more people know your brand and are seeking it out deliberately through the most direct way to learn more or potentially research and purchase from your brand.
Right. So I could have been running, for instance, out-of-home ads, and I should see, which is raising brand awareness with audiences unknown beyond the sort of targeting that you can do with an out-of-home. And that should correlate with more direct sessions, let's say, to our website. Or I could be doing events. So direct sessions feels like, okay, more people are coming directly to my brand name. They've therefore heard of me. It's working. It's not the only reason people type it in, but it's definitely a great, strong indicator of your overall brand. So that one seems straightforward to me.
Yeah. And that in combination with the next one, so direct sessions, and the second one is organic branded search impressions. I think those two really capture the bulk of the most common human behavior of when someone is going to seek you out because they now know of you and you're top of mind and they're ready to, again, research or come find more content or purchase. So organic branded search impressions is on Google or Bing, the number of times users search specifically for your company, product, or brand, right, in these traditional search engines. So I think those two in combination are pretty safe, clear indicators that if they're growing, your brand is more known.
Right. So I'm going to measure those, GA4, Google Search Console, free tools. Everyone's got them. Easy. So I'm measuring those two metrics monthly, I guess, over time to see whether they go up. And if they go up, my brand is better known. All right. Let's talk about the third one here, paid branded search impressions. If I'm doing a paid media program, I'm bidding on my own brand name here. Is that how that works?
Yeah. So we found this one to be pretty important to include if you're running branded search ads. It's a pretty common move to protect your brand and your messaging and that SERP real estate. If you're running this, it can push the organic result down. The bottom line is they're still searching you out by your brand name to be able to trigger these ads. So it's really only for Bing and Google search ads that are triggered off of your branded search terms, right? So together, alongside the organic branded search impressions, it's a more full picture of how your brand is servicing in search. And a cool little tip is when you show up, obviously, number one for the organic and number one or two for the paid search impression, you control more of the SERP real estate and have different messages and really get more across about your brand between the organic and the paid listing. So we like to have those complement each other oftentimes.
Yeah, I like that. Okay. And it's impressions. It's not clicks. So, they don't have to have clicked on it. I'm just getting the data from the impressions. And a lot of brands do this as just a sort of defensive play anyway. So again, that should be a very easily accessible number. It's coming in through Google Ads. The next one here, media mentions. PR, media coverage is a great way to drive brand awareness and reputation. There are lots of ways that you can measure PR, and you should be measuring PR quantitatively and qualitatively. But the simplest one is just simply how many articles did you get that mentioned your brand or the names of your products, right? And is that going up over time? Now, we debated this because, a more sophisticated PR measurement would look at the number of impressions and is it in the right target media and reaching a right audience, etc. And we can go down that rabbit hole. And also, is there an infinite number of, is this going to go up over time forever? It's just not. There's probably a top on this where there's only a certain number of media who are ever going to be interested in your brand. So, it can't carry on forever. But for most startups, let's say the number of articles that they get, if it's going up month by month over time, is a great proxy for an increase in the awareness of their brand. And the great thing about this, despite all of the disadvantages, it's very easy to measure and you don't need to buy a custom tool like MuckRack or what have you to do it. So this can just be straight, plug it in, goes up. How much did we get over time? Now, coverage each month is going to go up and down. It's going to have a lot of variability. compared to these other ones, when it's branded search, coverage might go up and down month to month. Hey, we've just announced funding. You're going to get more coverage on that day or in a product launch than you are when you're not making announcements. So, take a long-term view over this one. But we think that having this is a great proxy to show what kind of audiences you're reaching over time. So that's why this one is in there. Also, very cheap.
Yep.
The next one is a new one, right? And this one is a little bit harder to measure. And in fact, we're going to have a whole show on AI measurement. But the next one here, Alastair, is AI search sessions. Well, actually, this is AI search sessions. It's not mentions within the LLMs themselves. So just explain this one to me.
Yeah, let me explain why we're using this right now. If you think about the first metric being direct sessions and the second one being organic branded search sessions, and I mentioned those are really capturing 80 to 85% of the most common behavior people would go to seek out a brand that they already know about. This would probably help make up some of that other 15% or so, because we know that people are turning more and more to tools like ChatGPT, Perplexity, Claude, Philo, etc. Right? As of right now, these platforms don't really share the data about citations and mentions. It's something it's like the Wild West right now out there with all the companies racing to try to figure out how to best present this data. So until we're able to get reliably actual citations and mentions of your brand in these AI search tools, you can get search sessions and then work backwards with, well, if my sessions from these are growing, then obviously I'm showing up more, my brand showing up more in these tools, right? So in that way, it's also much easier to get, again, just simply through GA4, you can get this data using referral source traffic.
Okay. I think that's important, right? So there are tools, SEMrush AIO is one of them, that can measure your brand visibility within Perplexity or ChatGPT or whatever. Obviously, you have to then subscribe and set those up. And, so that comes with a cost.
Yes.
But those tools are great. And if you're doing GEO, you're going to need one of those. But for this brand measurement, you might not be investing in that right now, but you can, for zero cost, measure the traffic that you get from the referral domains, Claude.ai or DeepSeek.com or,
exactly.
Gemini, to your domain. And that's a sort of good proxy for visibility in the LLMs and therefore overall awareness. And that's what we're trying to get to. So throw this one in there and you can track that over time. Are we getting more clicks from all of the LLMs? And that sort of suggests we're coming up more in the citations, which suggests more brand awareness. That's the concept behind that one, right?
Exactly.
We did debate this, right? Because what we wanted, ideally, and maybe we can add in the future, the actual tools like the SEMrush AIO. The trouble is getting the data out of those systems, and most brands don't have that yet, right? So everyone has GA4, so that's why this metric is in here, and we could get more sophisticated on LLM visibility as it comes up, as it becomes more important. We'll obviously dial that in. All right. What's the next metric that we might measure when we're coming to brand awareness?
So no brand awareness dashboard would be complete without something measuring your social media presence. So here we have a simple and holistic metric that looks at activity and engagement, or rather mentions from other people about your brand to see if you're in the conversation. This is total posts and mentions. So the number of posts, articles, or mentions that your brand generates across the social sphere within a given time frame, right? So it's just a really nice snapshot of the volume of conversation and coverage about your brand. Since the advent of social media, it's been a place where brand should be active and represented. I mean, every single company has a LinkedIn page and a Meta page, whether they post on them or not, for example, right? So we wanted to include this one to make sure we're seeing how visible your brand is across all of these major, I think the major sort of 5 platforms.
Not just your own posts, I'm not just counting how active we are on those. We're talking about, although that's included, I guess, organic mentions of your brand when it comes to Reddit or LinkedIn. Hey, this is the best vector database, or these, it's going to come up and you need to count those because you have to have a look into those communities, those social networks, to see where your brand is coming up. And that's a great sign of overall visibility. This one is a little bit trickier to measure though, right? Like to get access to in a consistent way. I think if you're just doing it for one brand, for your own brand, you can probably just, count them up. We had to go to some more specialized tools to sort of be able to do this at scale. But if you've got some kind of social listening platform that's going to track sort of engagements and mentions of your brand, just use that and pull them in. It doesn't have to be super accurate. It just has to be consistent over time.
Exactly. You can do it manually, as you mentioned. If you're just starting out, you can get tools like Sprout Social, Talkwalker by Hootsuite. It's that social listening element, which can do a lot of other things as well. So they're pretty good tools.
Okay. So the second to last one here is share of voice. What do we mean by that?
This is basically the percentage of total brand mentions, conversations, engagement in your industry compared to competitors, right? So of all of the possible awareness out there for your industry, how much of that are you achieving percentage-wise? How much of the pie do you get? And if you're getting more of that, obviously means you're beating out your competitors and you are therefore a more known and trusted brand, right? A rising share of voice signals stronger visibility, awareness, and influence, while also revealing how we stack up against those larger and smaller competitors in the social sphere.
Right. And you can do share of voice for PR. You could do it competitively for brand mention, for branded search as well. Like you can introduce that competitive element for a number of these. But here we're talking about social share of voice, really. And the reason is, on PR, tracking competitive share of voice is very time consuming. What are we counting? There's all sorts of, as I said, yours is going to vary, and so is the competitors. So we just felt like, okay, how much more does it add? The social is easy to measure. And I don't think if you start adding in competitive share of voice when it comes to PR, you're getting much more signal than you do from the social side. But we did want to introduce this element of competitiveness to the mix here because, we could be sitting here thinking, hey, all these numbers are going up. We are doing really well. But if the overall market is ripping away because you're in a hot space, you could actually be doing quite badly when it comes to awareness. So you've got to have, it's brand awareness. We're trying to be one of the top three. But if all of our competitors are growing faster than us, we're not going to be one of those top three. So That's why there is an element of share of voice in this without going super deep on all of these metrics because, you're just trying to get an indication compared to the others.
Yeah, that's exactly right. With most of the metrics, you can benchmark against your own starting performance and go from there. And this one allows you to then benchmark against an outside force, which is another way to do benchmarking. It's between your number and how the competition is doing.
Yeah, love that. So far, we've been mainly talking about sort of awareness, but we haven't been talking about sentiment, which is one of the things that you mentioned right at the beginning. Like, if I'm an astronomer, suddenly everyone's heard of me, but they've all heard of me for the wrong reason. And I think they did a great job of sort of twisting that. But, we need to be known positively. And again, you can, when it comes to PR, you can certainly tally up are these positive mentions or not. But here we wanted to add in sort of social sentiment because the tools there are already pretty easily available and accessible. So just walk us through what we mean by brand social sentiment.
Sure. So this one adds a little bit of color, right? A little bit of qualitative measure and context to the awareness you're getting on social. That's going to be the place where consumers, prospects, customers are going to go to voice their opinion about your brand. So as you gave the nice example for the astronomer situation, not all awareness is positive, which could ultimately result in overall decline in brand awareness. So we want to make sure we're keeping a pulse on the conversation about the brand to make sure, hey, you might even get some feedback specifically about exact campaigns, right? Oh, I really loved that latest ad campaign you guys did because that was hilarious, right? So it's a really nice kind of final cherry on top to the methodology to understand, are we being seen in a positive light? And if you're not, how do you respond accordingly?
Yeah. And again, as I said, these tools for social sentiment are, a lot of the Sprout or what have you have got some element of sentiment analysis. They can get it wrong, but it's good enough. So here we wanted to have a dashboard, a number of metrics that sort of show our proxies for overall growing brand awareness, then one for the competitive part and one for the sort of sentiment. Because look, most B2B brands, they're not dealing with tons of negative sentiment. At least I hope that they're not compared to you might have in B2C. But nonetheless, very important to just acknowledge the sentiment part of it because you want to show increasing brand awareness and it needs to be positive and it needs to be outperforming competitors. And that's what we're aiming for. So that's what the dashboard is trying to gather. All right. So as you said, there are 8 of those, and it'd be great to have them all. But maybe you don't have a PR program, or maybe you don't have a paid media program, and so it's not really worth measuring those. But start and build the dashboard is relatively straightforward. Okay, I know I need to measure my brand awareness. How long should marketers be tracking this before they see meaningful trends?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a long game, right? Which I think is probably one of the main reasons it's hard to get buy-in, whereas a lot of startups want that immediate result and the immediate boost to pipeline, which is better suited for your sort of lead gen type campaigns. So brand awareness, right? It's something that takes time to shape people's perception about your brand. It takes many touches. It takes a concerted, well thought out strategy, something that perhaps is very memorable and positions you as a authority and a trusted source, right? So really it's something that we don't really start to measure or see actionable firm results until 6 months plus. You can get away with it at times after 3 to 4, you start to see the early indicators, but solid 6 months is usually a better data set. And the value is really watching that trajectory. So we'll add some trend lines on there because it's not always going to be just straight hockey stick growth. That's really the name of the game, is do it in a concerted way, but also, be patient, and you'll see growth over time if done right.
Yeah, agreed. And you can supplement it, right, with, if you want to do the brand survey, great, do the brand survey. I think that bit is actually getting more interesting now. AI moderated surveys that are run, you can target to your specific audience and run those in depth at scale. I think that's a very interesting area, but I still think for many B2B companies that are emerging, they're not doing that for their own brand. They're doing it for market research or other user stories, etc. But watch this space on that. Okay. So I'm measuring my brand awareness. I'm patient, but I can see it growing over time. That's good. Now I want to tie this in to my business objectives and my pipeline revenue ultimately, because I've got to justify this spend to the organization and to the board. How do I go about that?
Well, you can't directly measure it, which is kind of the point of this entire dashboard, is trying to create these proxies that represent growth in brand, something that's pretty esoteric, and quantifying that, right? And it's an upstream factor. So by the time revenue shows up in Salesforce, awareness has already long since done its job, right? So trying to force one-to-one attribution, right? Oh, this many impressions on our brand awareness campaign created this much pipeline. It doesn't work like that. That's oversimplification. I know execs don't love to hear that, but the more we can educate them on the changing intensity and times of AI search and zero click in marketing, the more they start to understand the increased value of brand awareness today, right? But you could still connect it indirectly, right? A correlation. That's effectively what this dashboard does, right? I mean, if you end up seeing a 3-month increase in inbound opportunities after 3 months by X%, at the same time, you had launched a very high reach, scaled brand awareness campaign across several channels, you can pretty much guarantee that's correlated growth because more people now know about who you are, eventually came back through other means, right? Whether that be organic search, whether that be direct or through social media.
Yeah, and it also works as a multiplier, right? If you have built your brand awareness and you've invested in that, then in that 60-40 way, let's say, then the leads that you get are going to convert more quickly and you're going to get a lower cost per conversion because these people have heard of you and they're positively disposed to you. So, it would be easy, I think, to kind of go, all right, we've been investing in this brand and, oh, look, our cost per conversion is going down. That's great. We've done a good job. You might think, oh, well, my search ads are doing really, really well. But actually, it's the investment in the brand that has caused that. If those two things correlate, I think that's really important. But you should try to, when talking about paid media, increase your ad spend on brand as much as possible because it's going to reduce the more expensive lead performance-based ad units that you've got going. So you should start to see it in that way. Okay, so let's just talk about, this all sounds good. There's a certain amount of education, but we'll know it when we feel it, and we'll see it in people having preference. We'll see it in candidates saying yes to our offers and being predisposed. We'll see it in lower churn of our staff. We'll see it in inbound investment and partners, etc. So there's lots of ways that positive brand awareness is helping the business. Where should marketers start if they want to measure brand awareness in this way?
Right. Like a lot of things in marketing, you got to get stakeholder buy-in first, right? The main thing is really framing the case for the increased importance of investing in your brand campaigns due to zero-click behaviors, declining trust, shifting buyer demographics, and AI influence. And then I think you can launch a sort of pilot if you want, but either way, you need to set baselines, right? So using the proxy measurements we talked about, get them set up, know where you are before launching a very scaled up, high reach brand awareness campaign, and monitor that over 3 to 6 month period, add in competitor benchmarking wherever possible for another point to prove improvement against. Then you look to launch something that's ideally across multiple channels, right? Maybe you have a fun, creative brand awareness campaign idea and you are buying billboards, out of home advertising somewhere, which are also supplemented by digital ads that are geo-targeted in that same area or even more broadly. And yet focusing on not just a lot of impressions, but relevant impressions, right? The levers and the mechanisms by which we can target across, especially paid and other means, are much more sophisticated now. So you can get a very highly relevant audience that's still a large enough size to grow awareness, right? And so don't get hung up on clicks and anything beyond just purely like presence, showing up where people that would care about your brand, where they are, meeting them where they're at, right? Track engagement and pipeline correlations. Once you hit that 4-6+ month, like we just mentioned, Morgan, you basically annotate when did you launch your brand campaigns, and then lo and behold, 6 months down the line, your performance campaigns and your engagement on your content is also up. That can be a correlation that your awareness is working because it is now letting more people know who you are and what you're about, right? And finally, I think, like most things, try to learn what's working, iterate on that, improve upon that, and then repeat, right? Because it is a long game. And then keep refining your campaigns, refreshing the creative, but not too frequently, right? I mean, if you have a big awareness campaign, it's typically good to stick with that for that first initial 4 to 6 month period.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because us as marketers, we can easily move on to the next idea. We like ideas, we like campaigns, and we're intimately familiar with this campaign because we've seen it from beginning to end. So almost by the time it's launched, I'm done with it and I want to move on. But your audience is only just starting to see it, and you've got to just keep repeating yourself until you're totally over it. That when they're suddenly only at that point, then they go, "Oh wait, who are you?" and sort of start to click into it. So I think the time frame here and the repetition, the frequency is way more than most of our sort of hummingbird like marketing brains will enjoy, but you've got to take that long-term
Right.
view when it comes to brand building,
Yeah.
particularly brand advertising.
And I often reference the Monday.com approach. And maybe this is because I'm in marketing, so I'm a relevant target, but they were a project management tool that was somewhat late to the game compared to Asana and Jira,
Yep.
but they really hammered home the brand, especially on YouTube videos and ads I saw for
Everywhere.
years and years. It was the same ad, if not at least the same ad campaign. And lo and behold, that seems to have paid off because they were able to generate so much awareness that they are in more of the early conversations, and they earned a lot more of the market share and caught up to some of the players who had been around for years.
That's right. And you would just see those ads again, and almost to the point where you're sort of bored of the ads, not because they're playing it so frequently within, a short time window, but just over a long period of time. Yeah, that's a great example. All right. So just as we wrap here, Alastair, what other advice have you got for marketers as they're looking to track their brand metrics?
Yeah, I think this is a fun opportunity. Seize the opportunity in the rise of brand awareness and the importance there to be more creative, right? Especially B2B startups. Decision makers tend to shy away from the little more outside the box or creative campaign ideas. But that's the thing that sticks in people's mind, that makes it memorable and makes you stand out, right? And sets your brand apart. So when they are ready to create their initial consideration list, you'd hope that you are recalled in that way. I think it's an exciting time because we've been really trying to do more of these brand awareness campaigns across multiple channels that have a cohesive theme and message, but that are more fun and more engaging and taking a little more risk, right? And then I think it's really important, again, to just think about how we measure this differently than your performance or your lead gen marketing. We tend to think of reporting here in sort of three phases. The first phase would be your outbound, where you're going out and sending your message, your awareness campaigns, for example, out to the market. And that has its whole set of metrics, most of which, we talked about in this framework. And then post-click would be the website, and that has its own whole set of analysis and metrics, which is not really what we're necessarily worried about here. And then finally, it's sort of post lead and the nurture metrics. So when someone has raised their hand, that has its whole set of metrics, including pipeline, right? Keep those in three distinct phases and treat them differently and measure the success against those much differently. And you'll see a lot more success and a lot more stakeholder buy-in, I think. And I think finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention keep humans in the loop, right? I think AI is fantastic. It's going to get better, of course. Great for ideation, iteration, scaling, time-saving techniques. But if the output, especially in your brand awareness campaigns, which will be seen by many more people than lead gen or post-lead nurture campaigns, keep it human, keep it emotional. Humans are emotional beings. That's the type of stuff we respond to, right? If it's too obviously machine-made and AI generated, it's people, not everyone, but many people, probably the ones who are most likely to buy from you, can tell, right?
Yeah, I agree. Brand is really back now. And, with those changes, zero-click search, etc., your brand is more important than ever. We've had a period of tracking metrics for marketing, and those are important. But here, you can also become much more creative and take a little bit of risk and marry that sort of left brain, right brain, science and art, depending on what you want to call it, to take some risk and to kind of have some more fun with the brand. And that's going to be really important. But you can measure brand through this way. So, Alastair, thanks for joining me to talk a little bit about this. Now, if people want to get in touch with you, where should they go?
You can find me on LinkedIn, Alastair Nee, just LinkedIn profile /Alastair Nee. I'm pretty active on there, engaging with all things brand, all things growth marketing, changes in organic search with generative engine optimization. Happy to connect anytime on LinkedIn with everybody.
Wonderful. And Alastair has a great blog post all about this topic, which walks through in more detail about all these metrics and how to set them up if you're interested. We'll post them in the show notes here, and they're also on our blog at firebrand.marketing. All right. That wraps this one up. Thank you all for listening. And I hope that was really useful to you. We will see you all again here next week.